Today we will look at some very special watches, some very unique and new additions to high luxury sports watches. We will look at some Czapek timepieces from their Antarctique line. Alternatives to the infamous integrated bracelet high luxury sports watches from the Holy Trinity are more and more in demand and are themselves starting to dry up. The Czapek Antarctique is a gorgeous watch with a beautiful, very unique movement. It competes with usual contenders from the integrated bracelet sports watch category. So we have the likes of the Girard Perregaux Laureato, we have the H. Moser and C. Streamliner, and the Bulgari Octo to mention a few. With high-end luxury watches, it's very important that you look at them while they are in movement or in action, as opposed to on pictures. The case of the Czapek Antarctique is very interesting. I really love when brands put some extra effort into sculpting their cases. If you only look at pictures of the Czapek Antarctique, it can look kind of flat, especially with pictures taken head-on. But that is far from the truth. As you can see in these close-up images of the case, there's just slight curves to every line, so you won't find a straight line on the case. And this is very subtle, but I really like the overall look it gives this watch. Comfort is a very important aspect to luxury, and this Czapek Antarctique is a beautiful 38.5 millimeters. This is an absolute sweet spot for the majority of people. I gravitate more and more towards smaller watches, mainly because they are just incredibly comfortable on the wrist. But for others, there's also a 40mm alternative. Other than that, this is a very thin watch with 10.6 millimeters, but still has a screw-down crown and 120 meters of water resistance. But now let's start looking at this beautiful movement. So this is a Czapek in-house movement, the SXH5, and is a beautiful micro-rotor movement. I really think this movement is something else. Every time I look at it, I'm really impressed by how well they managed to mix in traditional movement architecture with modern movement looks. And I think they really did a great job in setting themselves apart from more traditional Swiss brands like Vacheron Constantin, Audemars Piguet or Patek Philippe. It is just a very, very refreshing look to a movement like this. On the one hand, we have a very modern and contemporary look with the blackened bridges and the really straight skeletonization. And yet we have beautiful aspects of traditional movement finishing. We have hand anglage on every edge of each bridge. We have a very traditional movement architecture with these finger-style bridges for the gears of the drivetrain. And in the middle we have this black polished steel bridge. I love micro-rotor movements in general. It makes the watch thinner, it allows you to see the beautiful movement while still giving you automatic winding. And the mass on this micro-rotor is made out of recycled platinum. Not only is it a more valuable precious metal than gold, but it's also heavier, making it more efficient in winding. When taking a closer look at the micro-rotor, you can actually see the ceramic bearings, which is very cool, something I haven't seen before. And I really love the finger bridge look of this movement. Every bridge has this elevated relief and a frosted middle section, and I think it gives this movement such a beautiful and refreshing look. I mean, first of all, it doesn't look like any other of these integrated bracelet high-end sports watches. And we also have a full balance bridge, and with the 120 meter water resistance and the steel case, this is a real sports watch. And the movement has a quite nice 56-hour power reserve and a COSC certification. Speaking of certification, I want to point out this beautiful dial with minimal writing. I love that they didn't even include the chronometer certification. This particular model has a Stairway to Eternity motif on the dial, which is actually stamped. I would have expected a watch like this to have a guilloche dial, but apparently this kind of motif is not possible to create on a guilloche machine. Nonetheless, it is a beautiful dial made by Metallem, so one of the most famous dial makers in the world, supplying the likes of Philippe Dufour and also the Chopard models from LUC Chopard, so their more high-end watch division. The watches we have here are in the darker blue and the kind of baby or sky blue, which is my favorite, to be honest. But there is also many other colors, so black, and there's also kind of a salmon color, which is to me not really a salmon color, but more like this vintage tropical AP salmons, more orange yellow. There was also a gorgeous green limited edition and a crazy looking osmium dial, which is apparently the rarest metal in the Earth's crust. Never even heard of this metal, but it looks very cool. The bracelet on these watches is very beautiful. We see here some individuality, at least as far as integrated bracelets go. I mean, not to the degree of the Moser Streamliner, but I would say more than the Girard, Perregaux, Laureato. The center link is actually supposed to be a C, so for Czapek, but the more I looked at it, it seemed more just like a AP bracelet with the center links connected. But I have to say, it doesn't have the amount of finishing that we see on the likes of the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. Czapek really puts a lot of effort in their entire product, which is something I really like to see, similar to what we see at the Overseas from Vacheron Constantin. So not only do we have this extension on both sides of the clasp, you also get two additional straps, one in rubber and one in leather, and even an additional clasp. What I also really like is quick removal bracelets. I think it's a very practical thing to have, although I have to say here it's not as easy to do with your bare hands. But of course you get a tool from Czapek that makes it much easier. What do you think? Is this an alternative to the other integrated bracelet high-end sports watches? Do you enjoy some of the other alternatives over this one? Let us know in the comments below. Let's look at the price and the alternatives. The Antarctique with its 22,300 price tag competes, I would say, at least price-wise, with the H. Moser and C Streamliner. I think this is a very new and unique iteration or alternative to integrated bracelet sports watches. The likes of the Laureato and the Octo Finissimo are around the 13,000 range. And as we see more and more alternatives dry up, the Czapek Antarctique is a very, very unique alternative. But unfortunately, they also have closed their order books, and you should be ready because they will reopen their order books in April 2023 during the course of Watches and Wonders. As they're currently sold out, you will have to pay 10k over retail if you buy them from Chrono24, for example. So this is a 22k watch, so let's have a little look at some drawbacks that it has. Well, I think the evacuations on the case are very cool and add a lot of distinction to this case. Let's say they made it quite easy for themselves as far as case sculpturing goes. And as I said before, the bracelet is nicely finished, but not to the standard that we see at Vacheron Constantin, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet and H. Moser and C. I would say it's on the level of the Laureato, although being a little more individual in its design. I think the dial is beautiful, and I understand that this kind of pattern that they wanted to go for was not achievable using a hand crochet machine, but the fact that it's stamped and the fact that the finishing on the case and the bracelet is not to the highest standards, I would have liked to see the brand give back some of these shortcomings to the consumer by lowering the price maybe just a little bit. But that's just my little criticism, because this is an expensive item, of course. I love this watch, I really love the look of this watch, and I think the movement is really something very unique you don't see anywhere else in the Swiss watch industry. But not only do I have the regular Antarctique, I also have the split-second rattrapant chronograph. And let me tell you, this watch just looks incredible in person. I do like skeletonization, but I don't necessarily like if the entire watch is see-through. So here they have the best of both worlds. You can see many components of the split-second chronograph mechanism on the front and still have an open case back on the back. I mean, just look at this movement. You can see every part of the mechanism in action, and it's something so satisfying to look at, especially for me. This is a very, very unique watch, and imagine if, let's say, Patek Philippe released a split-second Nautilus back in the 80s. And you would think someone was crazy to not see back then that that was a watch to buy. I think this is a very new and unique iteration or alternative to integrated bracelet sports watches. So if this watch is not yet on your radar, I would suggest you get ready and get your checkbook ready for April 2023. By the way, a big thank you to Seilnacht Juwelier here in Freiburg for allowing me to film these beautiful watches. They really have some extraordinary watches. They have Czapek and Moritz Grossmann along other more usual brands. So if you're in the area or you have questions about Czapek, then hit them up on Instagram. I leave the links to their shop and their Instagram page in the section below. And that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you stayed this long and you enjoyed this video, then please leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing. We have more cool content coming very soon. See you next time. Ciao.